It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, June 11th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is going to dig into your mailbag questions, talking about scouting and how you physically evaluate prospects and so much more.
Yeah, fun stuff.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. I've been podcasting about the Flyers, the NHL, and hockey for a decade, and I'm here, as always, with prospect expert and Flyers credentialed reporter for 19 years, Russ Cohen. To keep up with our latest episodes and Flyers news, you can find us at Locked On Flyers on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Twitter, and of course, here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dig into those questions, the Calder votes were released. Of course, Lane Hudson won, which was
No
kind
surprise.
of to be expected there. Michkov, as we surmised, came in fourth. And there was a significant gap in the vote point totals between Celebrini, who came in third, and Michkov. And I mean, I suppose you can make something of it if you want to, but I just don't know that there's anything to quibble about here.
I didn't think so. Like, I voted Michkov third, but I get it if people didn't. Like, I understand it. And, if I certainly could argue why I chose what I chose. And I kind of did that once already. Look, the player wanted the award. He didn't get it. So that'll drive him in the future.
Exactly.
But it's not like he should have won the award.
Yeah, I think that's, if you want to make an argument here, I think maybe Michkov could have gotten more third place votes than fourth place votes here, and maybe made it a little bit closer of a gap to Celebrini. But I still think Celebrini deserved to be in that top three, so I wouldn't invert that at all. But like you said, I think Michkov is going to use it as motivation, and I'd much rather have that than quibble about points here and there in a Calder vote. And I think he's going to be a pretty good player regardless. And he is also supposedly going to play in a KHL versus NHL Russian player game in Russia on July 13th in CSKA in Moscow. So that should be interesting. I'm sure OV has a lot to do with that as well.
Yep. For sure. And yeah, that'll be a fun game. I don't know how it's going to be televised. If it will be, I don't know.
Yeah, if we'll have a chance to see it streaming or not. But it sounds like that it's a good thing if he's being asked to be involved.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. He's a big name for sure.
All right. So we've been getting a lot of really excellent mailbag questions, and so much so that there's a couple of them that we wanted to expand into full segment conversations here. And so we're going to start out with a question from our listener, David, who wanted to know about scouting and how that worked. So he asked what a team scouting structure is, has it changed over time, and what is the Flyers scouting structure, and what is the future of scouting, and all those related questions in there. And so I think a good place to start here is what are the marching orders of a team scouting department?
Yeah, so you're never privy to that information, like exactly what it is, but they definitely will refine it every year. And so if I had to guess what this year's was based on the guys that I spoke to at the Combine who spoke to the Flyers, I would say it skewed, in the largest part to hard to play against. I think that was the one thing that came through on all of them. So that still includes some smaller players. They certainly want to get bigger, but it doesn't mean they won't take a smaller player. I exclude Michkov from the smaller player group because you don't even talk about his size. Like, nobody would. It'd be silly to do so. So last year, I don't even bring that into the conversation. So I think, as an example, that's kind of where they're at for that.
Right. Now, I think we just have to take a step back and clarify. We're talking about amateur scouting here
Amateur.
because teams have, I think, two, maybe three separate groups within their scouting departments in general. So there's the pro scouts, which look at AHL, NHL players, and so they help the team in terms of potential trades
And advanced scouting.
and advanced scouting and things like that, right? Then there's also college scouts, which is a mix of amateur scouting to look for potential draft picks of guys that have already started college, but also in terms of college free agents that they could potentially sign. So that's kind of a smaller side group.
Yes.
But the bulk, I think, of the scouting department is for amateur scouting leading up to the draft. And in the Flyers case, as is the case for most teams, they have a North American scouting group, they have a European scouting group, and then sometimes you have a separate goaltending section as well.
Yeah, you have to have some goalie specialist on there to kind of help guide you, because not everything's easy, like Marc-Andre Fleury as an example.
Right. And it's obviously a very specialized position, and specific people know what to look for in that kind of scouting section that a team would have. So I think, when you're looking at how you utilize your scouts and what their particular orders are and how they report back to a Brent Flair, who's your AGM, who ultimately, I mean, Danny Briere makes the draft decision ultimately, but he takes it directly from the synthesis of the information you get from this whole scouting group, which is fed through Brent Flair.
Right. Yeah. Danny's basically sitting back at the table, listening to the reports, going over the board. He has the right to make a last minute decision, but if that's going to happen, it may only happen on a top pick, because you're going to get to a point in the draft where Danny no longer knows the players. That's just the way it is. So that's why, Brent gets those reports from everybody else, and he relies on that, and Danny relies on Brent and the other guys, and Brent is the mouthpiece for them. But at a draft table, they all get their say. So like in Atlantic City, they'll all get their say. But as we found out, you could scream for a player like Henrik Lundqvist, and he still might not get picked till the 7th round. Like, that just happens.
Yep. It's so interesting. I think one of the other more interesting things that has changed in more recent years, and especially, since COVID, is the use of scouting by video versus in person. And so how do you think that's changed, in these recent years?
I think it's changed in two ways. I think that the first thing is there's definitely more of it, but I think there was a time when, as an example, if you remember, maybe because I'm a website owner, maybe like 10 years ago, there were some websites that said, we're just going straight video. And they went straight video. They're no longer around anymore doing that. And there's a reason, because you can't do too much video. There was a team, and I'm not going to say who it was, but they went straight video in a draft, and they didn't have a great draft. So that was a bad decision. It's good to have the mix. You definitely have to have eyes at the actual game to see behind the play, to see a lot of different things. But you also need to decide, do you want your scouts to watch full game video, or do you want it to be a mix? Hey, watch the really important game. Like, this is me now talking. Me, it's like, hey, watch the really important games, and I'm going to want you to be there first. But if you can't, I want you to watch the really important games, but I do want you to watch isolated video and other video of those players to get a full feel of things. And don't just watch the highlights, which scouts would never do, but sometimes, fans do, and get an opinion of a player just from the highlights, and you can't do that. And scouts won't do that.
Right. And I think that's a really important aspect of it, because you got to see how they carry themselves. You have to see what do they do when they're on the bench? How intently are they watching the game? Are they communicating? Like, there's so much to it beyond just watching an individual shift.
Right.
And I think that's partially why being there in person is so important. And plus, you sometimes get opportunities like you do to talk to some of these kids.
Right. And that's how, they talk to players during the year and such, and it is important. And so, yeah, but it's a mix. Now it's like it's a good mix of everything. That's what you have to have.
Right. And for me, I think the success of a scouting group is not just in the overall draft results, right? That's the primary method to evaluate your scouting group is, 5 years down from a draft,
Right.
how'd they turn out, right? And
Right.
so I think really it's the ability of a group and then that AGM in particular to be able to take the reports of the scouts and synthesize it in a way that the GM can make the most effective decisions. And that is the linchpin is can you synthesize the information to create a draft board that's going to be effective?
Right. I could tell you that I don't know if the Flyers go back and do these reports 5 years from every draft. I think they should. I think every team
Yeah.
should. But I could tell you I don't think every team does because we could see that some teams are bad at drafting and they're continually bad at drafting. So there's no way they can do that because if they did, they would change it. So that's something that is probably something that should be employed more.
Yeah, I would absolutely do that for the Flyers. I think, you know, there's a lot of picks that they have made that looked good on paper at
Mhm.
the time that didn't pan out. And that happens to everybody.
Yeah.
And I would say like Samu Tuamala is a prime example of
Yeah.
that. I don't think anybody would have disagreed with that pick at that time. I
No,
really don't.
I remember my comment was I didn't have him in that spot, but I understand the shot and the skating. And so, like, yeah, did you know that he was going to go like 2 years of barely playing overseas? No. Is that his fault? Is it the coach's fault? We don't know, but it just happened.
Right.
So then he comes here and he keeps getting hurt. And then second half of the season keeps being a problem. Did we know that was going to happen? Did the Flyers know that was going to happen? No, there's no way of telling. So some of it's luck, some of it's player development, and then a lot of it's on the player.
Yeah, I think that the Flyers have been a mixed bag when it
Mhm.
comes to drafting. I
I think
think
so.
over the recent years, they tend to reach more than I probably would. I think they don't take enough big swings. We've mentioned that before. And I think that, Matvei Michkov, that pick was honestly the first like really, really strong pick they've made in I would say the last 5 to 7 years overall. And I think the Luchenko pick remains to be seen,
Right.
but it was also a bit of a stretch at the
Yeah, I
time.
mean, I think it's fair to call it a bit of a stretch based on who was on the board. I think,
Yeah.
that much you would get that remark just about from everybody outside of the Flyers group. They still could be right. We don't
Yep.
know. And that's why we don't
Totally.
remark on it that way because it's not a finished thing.
Yeah.
So, yes. But if you do enough of those, then those start to pile up. And, we brought up Cole Caulfield as an example, and he still will be an example. He's just one of what could be more. And we'll see what happens down the line.
Yeah. So, it's a constantly evolving process.
It is.
It's a lot of stuff behind closed doors that we will never know about.
Yep.
And they show us what little they want to in their little draft recap
Yep.
videos that the teams do. And I think, there's a secret sauce to it that we just don't know the flavor and we never will. But in the meantime, another group of questions that we've gotten is around how you physically evaluate these prospects. And so we're going to dig a little bit into that coming up next. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, and each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel full longer. And personally, I love the no shells variety because I'm lazy and I do not want to take the time to shell the wonderful pistachios. It makes it the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Plus, I can have it at my desk while I'm working. And I keep reloading on the sea salt and vinegar no shells variety. It is definitely my favorite flavor, but you should try all of them because they're all delicious and healthy too. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. These little green wonders pack a protein punch. So get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. On tomorrow's show, we are going to talk about the goalies in this year's NHL draft with special guest Brad Allen of Hockey Prospect Radio, that's over on Sirius XM NHL. Very excited to talk to Brad and dig into Joshua Ravensbergen and all the other goalies on the list in this year's draft. One of our listeners, Joseph, posted on our YouTube channel in the comments a question related to Jet Luchenko, who we just talked about, and that his draft stock increased with the combine workout. And that's kind of partially what led to the Flyers becoming more interested in him and eventually picking him. And we've gotten questions like that over the last several weeks. And so we thought we would dig into that a little bit more as well. And with Russ seeing these guys all throughout the year at these various events, like we just talked about in terms of scouting, you got to be there in person to get the full picture. We thought we would just talk a little bit more about how you evaluate the physicality of these guys and how that translates into drafting and potential success as a player. So, Russ, like, what are you looking for at the combine relative to where they've been in the past?
So a couple things. One of the first things that always gets asked at these interviews, at not from us, but from teams, are how tall is your mother? How tall is your father? How tall are you expected to be? Now, the reason that's important is, as an example, I went into 11th grade summer and I was 5'3", and I came back after 11th grade summer going into 12th grade and I was 5'9", and now they say 3/4, so whatever, 5'9" and something and a half. Some people didn't even recognize me. They're like, they had no idea. That happens with players. We talked about Riker Lee. Riker Lee told me early in the year he's still growing. Spoke to him again. He said he's still growing. So, he could end up being like 6'2" when it's all said and done. But some people in their minds still think he's shorter because they haven't caught up with the measurements from the combine, which it's hard to do, right? It's not always out there. So that's one thing. I do look at up here, upper body. I used to lift weights, right? So I look at kind of the neck and everything else. That's why they do bench press. There is some reasoning for that. And so as an example, James Hagens, I posted a picture on Sportsology. I sent it to you. You could see the development of him up here, right? Now, if some people want to say, hey, he's kind of like Jack Hughes in his draft year, he's not. He's 186 pounds. Jack Hughes, I think, was 155, maybe 157, something like that. Big difference. Big difference. So, that could matter. So I look at that. I also look at, like the core. I look at the legs. There is that thing that I've gotten called a long time ago that I had chicken legs, but I've done so much walking and other things over the years that my calves have naturally built up because of that, right? But it wasn't when I was younger. And that happens with a lot of these guys. You can go look at, like Sam Bennett couldn't do a pull-up. Doesn't mean he wasn't a good hockey player, but he just wasn't training that way. Casey Middlestat couldn't do much of anything at the combine except the bike and a few things because he was just sort of like a natural athlete, but had never really done any of these things. And then you get a guy like Will Horkoff, who went there with the intention of breaking what they call the horizontal jump, but the long jump. And he did. And he broke the record for that. So those kinds of things. So, there were some players I saw that I said, ooh, you could look at it two ways too. There's a guy, if I feel like his thighs are a little underdeveloped, okay, it's not great for today, but he could fix that. So you have to look at it both ways. What happens if it gets fixed? Or you could look at a player like Carter Amico, who's 235 pounds, and you're like, there's probably just some fine tuning here, but this is it. Like, you already can see what's in front of you.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think, It's a really delicate subject because
Mhm.
these are like 17, 18-year
Yes.
old kids, right? And so you don't want to be overly judgmental
Mhm.
about them because, like you said, they're still potentially growing and they have room to work out and fill out. And we see guys even in the NHL like hit 30 and maybe even aren't at their muscular peak yet, right?
Right.
And so you just kind of have to look for clues in their frame
Yep.
and what their approach is to
Yeah.
training and
Yeah.
talk to them.
Mhm.
That it's not just looking at them, it's talking to them and seeing how they plan to get where they want to go. Where do they want to go physically and how do they plan to get there?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, and nutrition plays a part.
Yeah,
And as an example, we go back to Jacob Fowler not that long ago, a few drafts ago, and teams were passing on him because they felt like he was bad at conditioning because he was chubby. Yet he had won the Clark Cup in the USHL and had won and been on big time teams, but they didn't like that. Well, it was because he didn't know how to eat correctly. He learned how to eat correctly. He's in the AHL this year. He was winning games for Laval. Now some teams wish they would have taken the chance on him and just realized, oh, we just need to show him how to do it. Not every kid is, up on perfect nutrition and such. If they're with even if they're with a team, sometimes it could elude them.
right. And sometimes it's hard to be as disciplined because there's less
Hmm.
structure
Right.
around it and less monitoring. But I think, once you got to a certain level, there's going to be those resources there to help you out. And so I think that's an important
But
aspect
we don't
of
know if
it
they dig
for sure.
into it. Like it wasn't like he was at a program, he was at the national program. Clearly they have trainers and great trainers, but we don't know to what degree they dig into what do you eat every day? Give me a journal. You know what I mean? Maybe they
Yeah.
needed to do that, you know?
Yeah. Now, Joseph asked about Jet Luchenko
Mhm.
and was there anybody in this year's draft that had a similar thing relative to the Flyers' interest? I think there's a player that may have impressed himself out of the Flyers' range, and that could be Anton Frondell. So, like, what did you see from him?
Yeah, the interest in Anton Frundell has grown 100-fold, and I'm not sure if it's because they just weren't seeing enough of him, or they had just heard certain things and now we're seeing something else. I took a video of him doing the vertical leap, and thank God I got a new camera because I wasn't really close at the time because it's a 3-ring circus. Like I'm trying to do a little
Right.
of that, and they're bringing out 3, 4 players at a time. And so like I no way I could ever talk to all 90, no way I could ever video everything. Even if you have 2 people, you can't do it all. So, but I did it, and it has over 20,000 views because he looks good doing it. He seeing him, you realize, wow, this guy's a big, imposing, physical guy, like more than what you could see in the hockey uniform. Then he does an interview and he's really like completely down to earth, honest, very honest. And then it's like, yeah, he really helped himself here.
Yeah. So we'll see if he's even around for the Flyers to pick from at 6 at all, given all of that. But that's, a prime example about how
Yes.
somebody can impress at the combine
Yep.
and really increase their chances of being picked a lot higher. Y'all have some additional questions that are pretty great, and some are draft related, some are Flyers related. So we are going to dig into those coming up next. So one of our longtime listeners slash viewers, Chris, commented, I heard rumblings that the Blackhawks might not re-sign Victor Söderström. Should the Flyers take a shot at him? On paper, he looks good, but he hasn't been able to crack an NHL lineup. Your thoughts?
I really like him. I liked him in his draft year. Then I felt like, was Arizona doing the right thing at the time? I don't know. And then when they did start to try and use him more, he wasn't producing. But then he goes back to the SHL and he produces. So would I
Right.
take a chance on that guy? Yeah, I would, because I know what the ability factor is there, the skill factor, the skating, and all that. I just don't know today what he would look like in an NHL rink. That's a question, right? But would I bring him in for a 1-year look-see? Yeah, I would.
Yeah, it's interesting because to your point, he was drafted by Arizona
Hmm.
in 2019 and his rights got traded to the Blackhawks in a trade deadline deal. And it just seems like the Blackhawks are going to let those rights expire.
Right.
And then Söderström, he's 24 years old now, and he was the SHL's top defenseman of the year. Like, he won that award. So, you know, he's had a very successful season over there. It's almost like signing an overager and
Yeah.
kind of bringing Anthony Richard in, I would
Yeah.
equate it with.
Yeah, and he's a
as far
power
as
play guy too, so he could
yeah.
do that too.
Yeah, so I think it would be interesting. I'm
Mhm.
just not sure if he wants to come over at this point,
Right, we don't know.
given that Arizona kind of tossed him around a little bit between the Coyotes and Tucson at the AHL level. So he may just be like, I'm done with it and I'm going home. That could be part of
I'm
it
gonna guess he
as
probably
well.
still would like to play in the NHL if he could.
Yeah, it may just take the right circumstances.
Yeah.
So we shall see. There've been a lot of comments and questions about Nic Hague, who had some rumors out there because there's just no room in the Vegas Golden Knights budget and cap for him because he's had, you know, pretty solid seasons the last couple of years. He's an RFA and his qualifying offer right now is 2.7 million. He's a third pairing defenseman on Vegas, let's say. Does he have the potential to be higher than that for the Flyers? And like, is there a reason why the Flyers should give something up to trade for his rights at this point?
In my estimation, no. Vegas looked slow to me when they played Edmonton in the playoffs. He was one of the reasons. He's never been a great skater. He has a really good shot, but it takes a long time for him to do it. So that's why he gets 5 goals a year. He can, you know, he uses his body and such. He could play the position. But if you're looking to get faster in the future, he's not the guy you want. And if you want a big guy, Hunter McDonald can skate. You just have to wait for him to develop. So like to get Nic Hague would make no sense to me, but it doesn't mean they won't. It's just, and you know, if you got him for a short term because you wanted to kind of bridge the gap and try and work on his skating, okay, but I wouldn't give up big assets for Nicholas Hague.
No, I mean, the question I would ask about it at this point is, would you rather have Zamula or would you rather have Nic Hague on your team?
Zamula.
Yeah, I know. That's what I think too, because I think Zamula has a little bit more flexibility in roles that he can provide and situations that he can play in. Is he a phenomenal defenseman? No. Is he a solid NHL defenseman?
Yeah.
Sure. So I just don't know that I would give up anything because to me, that's just like somebody that's maybe slightly better in some ways, probably slightly worse in other ways than Zamula. So we're at a wash here.
Yeah.
And why change it?
Yeah.
That's kind of my take on that. Paul asked us, Cam York regressed from 2 years ago, or at the very least had a disappointing season with a lack of progress and the gone too far argument with Torts, make or give Danny Briere and Keith Jones more reason to move him in a trade?
So there's a few things. I like Cam York as a guy. I think he's an excellent skater. He can move the puck. He's still not accurate with a shot. And the physicality that even said was going to come along, or strength at least, just been marginal. It hasn't been great. He has played his offside too much, and I think that probably hurt him a little bit.
Yeah.
So, you know, I do think he could play better. My feeling is I would dangle him out there because I'd like to see what other teams think of him. And, you know, you might be surprised. And if it's something that you need more than Cam York, you know, like a center, if that's a part of a trade like that and, you know, a couple of picks and you can get somebody really good, then you do it. And I wouldn't hesitate in doing it. But it's not like I'm throwing him out the door.
Yeah. And we've talked about this in the past in the sense that it would likely have to be a sign and trade situation.
Yes.
Because teams would need to know what they're paying.
Right. Yeah. You want a definite salary because if you're just trading him as an RFA, they still have to negotiate with him. So, yeah, they're going to want a known quantity in the salary.
Yeah. And so I think that's a huge element that the Flyers would have to deal with in any sort of deal. But I also think that he really might change things with a different coach.
It's possible.
And a fresh start. And I think that unless there's a really solid return for something specific that the Flyers are looking for this off season, I think it's worth giving him another shot with the new
Yeah, I
coaches.
tend to lean towards that. Like I said, it would have to be a center or a really good goalie
Yeah, I
in the
think that's
framework of
right.
a deal. Yeah.
I think that's really spot on, and I think that there's other ways that the Flyers could fill that defensive role at the moment,
Yeah.
but, I think there's enough in the system that they could if they needed to, or they could go out and sign a free agent if they
Right.
decided that was the better way to do it as well, at a similar value,
Yeah.
I would add. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting. We'll see. We're still, as of recording, waiting on that contract
Yep.
for Cam York to see what the dollar figure will be. So stay tuned on that. Neil commented on our discussion about Cole Reshney, who
Hmm.
is a prospect we've been talking a lot about over the last week, especially following the combine, saying, I actually like him a lot. I think he might be the second best distributor of the puck in this draft behind James Higgins. I think Reshney would be a really good QB on a second power play unit. What do you think?
Yeah, I really like him. He definitely could play on the power play. I don't know about a QB part. Well, I'd have to see what he looks like when he gets there. But and he's one of the better distributors. I'm not going to say second, but I'd say one of the better. I like him. I think he'll go through a wall for you. He spoke glowingly about the Flyers. So, he looks at Travis Konechny as kind of like, a guy that maybe he could aspire to be. I think there's a chance he might have more offense than even Travis does, but it's hard to tell right at this moment. So, yeah, I mean, I would take him with the second pick if they decide that they're not going to take the goalie there because they're going to take one of the other guys that we talked to with Brad Allen. Then, yeah, if that's the plan, then I'd be on board with that.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I hesitate to get attached to him
Hmm.
because the variables are plentiful here and the board could go any which way. And I don't necessarily think at this point he's a guy I would work to trade up even a few spots in the
No,
draft for.
no, I
But
wouldn't
if he's
either.
there, I would very, very heavily consider him.
But as the scenario goes, like if James Higgins were to fall to them and they take James Higgins, then they're not going to take Cole Reshney. They are going
Right.
to take a bigger
Exactly.
player with the next pick, and that's usually how it goes.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. So this is a see how it goes kind of
Right.
guy here for sure. Pepper on Twitter suggested Isaac Howard for Bobby Brink. What say you, Russ?
Well, you can't do it exactly like that. You have to trade for his rights, and if he's going to
Hmm.
be a guy that is a sign and trade, then you could do it like that. If he negotiated a contract with Tampa, and then they trade him and his rights to the Flyers, you could do it that way. But it's probably not going to work that way. It's probably going to be Tampa trades his rights to somebody, and that's a team either he says he has interest in at least or is willing to sign with right away. But again, I always bring up the Adam Fox thing where Calgary did that. They traded it to Carolina. Carolina did not sign him, and the Rangers still got him. So you have to be careful with that. Of course, I love Isaac Howard. I watched him at the program. I think he's a terrific player. I'm a little puzzled what happened in Tampa as to why this is going on. Maybe he just doesn't see the opportunity. So, yeah, would I explore it? Absolutely. But the biggest thing about exploring it is he has to want to play for the Flyers. If he doesn't, then it's over because he has control.
Yeah,
Especially if
I
he
think
goes to
that's it.
to the point where he's a senior, then he could pick any team at that point.
Right. And I think even on paper right now, I don't think that you can say that Isaac Howard would be better than Bobby Brink. Right.
Not yet, but he has a higher ceiling, I think.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that it's really an apples and pears thing to me right now because we're looking at potential versus an actual NHL player that we kind of know what we've got with.
Yeah, but if
And
you just told
so
me I could trade one for the other and it would work out that way, I would do it. Sure.
you think?
Oh, in a heartbeat. Yeah. Because
Yeah,
the
that's
skating's so much better on Isaac Howard that I'm going to take the chance. Everything else is going to be there.
yeah, I think that's fair. I just think it's hard to
I
say
know.
that right now because it's kind of less information.
Hmm.
that we know about Howard in terms of how that potential is going to come to fruition. So it's hard for me to say that for sure, but I certainly understand where you're coming from in terms of the potential being out there and the ceiling being higher. So really interesting proposal there.
Yep.
And,
I like it.
we'll see if the Flyers are in on Isaac Howard at all. I think that's a whole other aspect to
they
this
can wait until after
conversation.
he's a senior and then try and get him then,
Yeah. Yeah.
after that season.
All right, that will do it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening. We will be back tomorrow to talk NHL Draft Prospect Goalies with Brad Allen of Hockey Prospect Radio on Sirius XM NHL. And as a reminder, we always want to hear from you. If you want your mailbag questions answered on the show, like we just did today, let us know on any of our socials at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com or comment on our YouTube channel. I'm Rachel. I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology on the same socials, SPORTSOLOGY.
Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen today. For your next listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. It's every game, every night until the Stanley Cup is awarded. Get local analysis on a national scale with NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have a great day, everyone.